welcome. I am Dr. Amber Archuleta Lucero, and we're at EPCC Talks once again. And we are so excited today. We have an opportunity to have a conversation with Dr. Brandon Rottinghaus from the University of Houston. The reason Dr. Rottinghaus is with us today is he is one of the authors of Inside Texas Politics, our textbook, and he had an opportunity to talk with students this morning. And so here we are at the podcast. And of course, let me explain, as I always do, a little bit about the podcast objectives, which is really just capturing the human genome in an effort to really interpret and explain and hear about the human story. And so that's why we're here today, and we're excited, and I'd like to welcome formally Dr. Brandon Rottinghaus from Oxford Publishing and to El Paso, Texas. You know what I didn't ask you is, was this your first time here in El Paso?
This is my second time in El Paso. I was here last year for a talk at UTEP. One of my very good friends teaches there, and so I needed to reconnect with him, and we did a little talk, and he took me all around the city, and just a marvelous place. It's so unique, and I've been virtually every place in Texas except out west, and so this was my first trip. That was my first trip, and I've just fallen in love with it.
Good. You know, I'm so glad to hear that. I'm originally from Denver, not
nice.
from here.
Yeah.
I've been here 14 years, and I have really come to call this my sort of resting place. It is just not knowing family, friends. I just moved here on an investment. I grew just to be part of the fabric here, and I'm so grateful. So officially welcome to El Paso.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad you're here at El
Yeah.
Paso Community College. I know we are talking tonight to a group of people.
Yes.
But really, the reason why I have you here today is I really wanted to talk to you a little bit about who you are.
Yeah.
Of course, accomplished author and speaker, have your own podcast. But Brandon, let me start kind of at the beginning, if you don't mind. If you can tell me a little bit about where you grew up, a little bit about your childhood, your parents. Let's kind of start the journey there, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I grew up in Dallas, outside of Dallas, north in a little place called Plano, which is not so little anymore now. Every place in Texas is booming, especially the suburbs. So my parents moved to Texas when I was about 3 or so. So I'm not a native Texan, which of course for some people is a sticking point. And I can never be in the Texas Country Music Hall of Fame even if I had any musical talent. I couldn't be, because you have to be a native Texan. So my dad worked for an oil company, worked for Mobil, and he had lived out west, and so El Paso was part of his territory. Eventually they moved up to Dallas, and so they came in that wave of Texans who migrated to the state in the 1970s and 1980s and kind of changed the way that Texas was formed, and in effect we're seeing something similar now. So it was a suburban childhood. It was nice. We went to good schools, and I had a very good experience. I started working in speech and debate when I was young, when I was in middle school, and just got the bug. I loved it. So it was a neat place. In fact, after I'm here, I'm going to be in Dallas for a talk, and so I'm going to stay the weekend with my parents, and we're going to celebrate Texas Independence Day with some cold beer and hopefully some hamburgers. So we still keep in close touch.
Your extended family, your grandparents, they close by as you were growing up?
They lived in Kansas. So I was born in Kansas City, and they lived in on kind of a rural area and on farms, and my parents both grew up farming. So they were the first in their family to go to college. My mother was a nurse, and so went to nurses school at Kansas, and my dad went to a small private Catholic school and became an accountant. And it was a struggle for them, and the way that they tell it was, I think, probably similar to a lot of people who are first-generation college students. They didn't have the kind of resources that you would have to, if you were a second, third-generation college student.
Right.
They felt lost, and a lot of times I think that there would have been aided by a bigger effort to incorporate people who weren't generally aware of what was happening in the academic world. So that's something that I'm very sensitive to when I have classes.
Absolutely.
At UH, our students are often first-generation college students, and they're working full-time and or simply don't feel like they're in the right place. And so I'm particularly sensitive to that because I know that my parents had something similar to that.
Yeah, I remember starting off myself. Parents didn't go to school, grandparents didn't go to school. I'm lucky I found my way to school.
Yeah.
But being a very young person in just what I thought was just a
Yes.
huge, overwhelming place
overwhelming.
without a lot of direction. So, getting back to your childhood, so I know your experience sounds a little bit different than your parents' experience. When you were in middle school, and eventually high school, can you give me some of highlights of maybe your experiences there in terms of how you engaged with content, or what the takeaway was as you navigated the path from middle school to high school? What was that like for you?
Yeah, so my most formative experiences were doing speech and debate, and I was shy and didn't really, I wasn't really outgoing in that way. And maybe I still am. It's just you can sort of fake a little bit when you teach, like it's sort of your part of your job. But I was just right out of my shell by doing speech and debate. Part of that was, actual debate where you have, resolution and you have evidence and you present sides. And sometimes it was extemporaneous speaking where you get a topic and you're supposed to research that topic for a short while and then you deliver a short speech. So that was a big moment for me, and just exposing me to issues and sort of politics, but also how to frame arguments and how to approach material, and how to organize material. And I think that was probably influential, not just in terms of doing that and doing it well, but to be able to organize for your own schoolwork, right? Having to have these things when you needed them for a test or for an exam or for a paper or something. So that was helpful for me. So engaging with that when it was a lot of material that had to be distilled was a tough thing to do. We also had great teachers. I had a great history teacher. We had a great civics teacher, and they were brilliant at bringing out the interesting parts of the world. And so when I began to write, and especially on the textbook, I wanted to highlight the stories and the people. Those are the things that make it stick for people. And you obviously have to have the key parts, the highlighted, bold words, because that's part of what we're doing. But it's the personalities that make it click. And so for me, that's how I approach the study of these phenomena, but also in the textbook, how I write it.
These teachers that you talked about, I think they too are fundamental to everybody that we are. I remember sitting in a classroom right after what we had as lunch, and then the recess and get back. And the very first, and this is in Denver, the very first thing that we would do up until high school is, and maybe it was part of the curriculum, is that we'd have this story time. But it was story time in terms of high school, like Shakespeare or Willy Wonka, or different types of stories. Beverly Cleary stories. What would you say, or whom would you say is the very first teacher that took notice of you in terms of your talents, your energy, your efforts, the person that you are today? Whom would you say you engaged with at that level?
Our high school speech and debate teacher. So I went to schools that were split in a weird way. I'm not sure if Texas does this anymore, but we had like 9 and 10 at one school and 11 and 12 at another. These are mega schools, and so I think just the number of people required them to split it. Our school was the 9-10 school. That debate instructor, speech instructor, was so accommodating and so welcoming to a kid who was a little bit shy, and maybe I didn't have the full skill set the way some of my colleagues I know did, and was able to see a diamond in the rough and work with me. And eventually the way that it worked for this particular event was there was a student congress, and you were selected by the team to go, and she selected me as a freshman, and it was a big moment and an eye-opening sort of involvement for that, for doing that kind of work. And so I really enjoyed that. And so she was the first person to, that I can remember in that way, kind of taking an academic risk on somebody who, maybe was not going to do that great. And I still think about that because there are all kinds of times where you could give half an effort, right? And you would probably get away with it. And I think about it when I have those moments where you think, if you don't work your hardest, you're not going to get the full payoff. So, I try to tell my kids this too, like, there's no substitute for that hard work. And it's that hard work that's going to get you attention, even if it's something you don't want to do, or it's boring, or you're tired.
Absolutely.
You have to put that work in.
Absolutely. What was her name?
Her name was Sharon Townsend. Yeah. She was just a wonderful person, and just so patient with us, ninth graders, and 10th graders who still trying to find your way in the world. And she helped us a lot.
In terms of your parents, as you navigated the path through middle school to high school, pretty involved in things that you were doing, and all of the times that you have to go to practice and have to do these things and these and the other things involved.
I remember, being picked up late at night after coming back from a debate tournament across town. They would be there to pick you up. And now as a father, I see those same things, and I recognize that it was probably a major burden, right? Like, you have to stop what you're doing and go and pick up the kids at all hours. And I'm more appreciative now, I think, of that than I was at the time. I suppose that's the way for everybody, but they were very involved in that. And they made a nice living, but they weren't wealthy by any means, but they still sent me to different camps to do debate. I went to Baylor University and to Kansas for a summer for 2 different phases. And that's not cheap, and it was probably in a position, but they saw I loved it, and it was needed.
Was it what kind of conversations did you all have at home in terms of college? I mean, was it a given? We went, you're going. Or was it optional? You have these choices in front of you. You can do some other things. What were those conversations like?
Yeah, one of the things that they did for me was to not do any of that. And I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but I suspect it was not, because I think even as sort of first generation college students, they still didn't see the value of what they had. So they didn't coach me at all in that. I did my own research and investigated schools I might want to go to. And, you have a network of friends who are in the similar boat, so you learn from them and they learn from you. And I had an extended family who had done similar things. And so ended up choosing a college that one of my cousins went to, in part because it's a good school, but also because it felt natural. So they didn't have those kinds of conversations, like the sort of SAT prep work. We didn't do that, kind of gaming the college essay project. We didn't do that. Like, none of those things happened. I had to kind of do it on my own. And I have to say that I think I'm probably better for it, at least that I learned it on my own without having to be told what to do. And I want to do that for my kids too. I mean, you want to be there, you want to show them that there's a path. Absolutely. And that, in case there's a problem or they go astray, you can lead them back to the straight and narrow. But it's good to know it on your own, and that's the way you're going to remember it best.
Once you got there, the transition for you in terms of, was it a college that you lived at? I mean, away from home?
It was. It was at Purdue. Okay. So growing
Okay.
up in Dallas, moving to Indiana was like going to Mars. It was like cold and corn was everywhere. So going from suburban Dallas to rural Indiana was a shock.
What was the social transition like for you there in terms of your shyness and, well, now that you're debate team and now that you're at Purdue University, what was that like?
It was tough still. I mean, I still in social situations would find myself being very quiet. And I remember a friend telling me after we became much closer that in the first few weeks I would say very little, and everybody was nice and we all liked each other, but I would try not to say too much because I didn't want to spend too much time talking about myself or say something wrong. So that changed eventually, and I grew with some of the greatest friends I'll ever have. And I think that's what this moment in time should be about, right? That's what college should be about. So it took a little time still to come out of that, but once I found my people, once I found my relationships that were working, I just felt like I flourished, and I really enjoyed it.
Talk to me a little bit about maybe some of the demographical changes between Dallas and then Indiana. What that felt like and what that meant to you, and I don't know, your takeaway from all that.
Yeah, it was profound. I mean, definitely in Dallas, you would see Latinos, you would see African Americans. I had lots of Asian friends, both South Asian as well as in other parts of Asia. Families who were first generation in the country, sometimes second generation. So it was a fairly diverse place, and it was the suburbs in Dallas, so it's not the most diverse. It's not diverse like El Paso or even in some places in Houston, but it was diverse enough that when you went to a place like Purdue, where this
evident
the areas in the states in the Midwest are not terribly diverse, it was definitely noticeable. And now looking back, you can appreciate the value of that diversity, and you miss it. And I think now when you're in a place that's not diverse, it feels foreign. I was at Purdue for a talk last year, and you don't see people of color. You don't see also faculty of color. And those were some big changes that I assumed over time would be made, but still aren't. So it was a little bit shocking.
Mm-hmm. I remember, in Denver, and then left Denver to a very small place in northern New Mexico, Las Vegas, New Mexico, and then leaving to Austin. And again, you use the word noticeable. Thinking, looking back at those changes. At the time, I think you're young and naive. You just think this is the norm, right? People navigate from this point to this point, and all of this that is around us is just on the surface. But now that you're sitting here in front of me, you look back and you're like, wow. I mean, just sometimes the individuals who are not represented on campus, right?
Yeah.
Who are part of our larger climate in El Paso, in Harris County. It just feels, like you said, foreign, very different.
Yeah, and I feel like it's very insular in a way that you don't have the exposure to people who are from different backgrounds or who grew up differently. I mean, typically people at these sorts of major universities are growing up the same way, and that's changed a little bit, but overall you don't see that, and you miss it because of my most favorite relationships and some of my best friends are people who didn't grow up the way that I did, and that's eye-opening in a way that college should be, and hopefully is for a lot of people.
When did you know in this segue through Purdue that you were going to go further in terms of your own academia?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So when I was in college, I had friends who were volunteering on political campaigns. So in the summer after my freshman year, interned and worked with a statewide Senate campaign, Victor Morales, who was a teacher himself, and we had mutual friends, and so I volunteered in the campaign, and it was a shoestring campaign. This is 1996. We were running the campaign out of a strip mall in Mesquite, Texas, and taking on Phil Gramm, who was, an absolute titan, and had 10 times as much money as we did, and 100 times as much sort of political capital. So I volunteered with the campaign in the summer, and they needed help for the fall, and so I agreed to stay on in the fall, basically taking a semester off from college. And my parents, that was the point where they decided that they needed to be more involved, because I told them I'm going to take a semester off and work for this school teacher who drives around Texas in this little Toyota pickup truck. And they said, "You're going to do what now?" So it was that point where they got worried, like he's not going to go back to college. But that wasn't at all part of the plan. I always wanted to sort of pursue politics in that way. And so we finished the campaign and made some great friends where we saw a lot of diversity. I mean, not just the state, but our campaign team was extremely diverse. Before, that was a thing people cared about, and now it's more common. But back then it was not something people recognized. But Victor managed to pull together a really interesting group of tight-knit people.
How old were you then?
I was 19 years old. I could not even drink, but I did. So sorry, Mom and Dad. But we occasionally would have a few beers after a long week. But that was a formative experience for me. And in doing so, I realized two things. I realized, number one, I love politics, but I also realized I didn't want to do it forever. And what I really liked about it was looking at these patterns and understanding people's behavior and thinking about where historically this sort of moment can be, and seeing networks like obviously being a Latino and the first Latino Senate candidate in history gave us opportunities to be able to make relationships and to see how those divisions within the Mexican-American community were creating political conflict for Democrats. And so I just liked the notion of it, the structures. And so I realized I didn't want to do it forever because it's really hard work. And so all my students who do it, and I'm sure all your students who do it, just kudos, because it's an amazing thing. But it's hard to do when you get older. And so I realized those two things, and then sort of began to edge towards the more study of politics instead of the practical on the ground stuff.
Would you ever consider running for office?
No, I don't. It's not my thing. I love people and I love talking to people, but the kind of choices that have to be made, the kinds of compromises that have to be made, I'm not sure I'd be that good at. As faculty, we have a lot of autonomy, and I don't think I could give that up to have to make compromises.
Get a little spoiled, I know, right?
We are, and I every day remind myself how lucky that we are to do this, because it's an amazing job and we do amazing things, but it wouldn't be for me. I like to study it and I love being around it. Politicians are, by and large, interesting people. Some of them so egocentric it's hard to get in touch, but the ones who are really good, the ones who really have a feel for people and care, those are the people who are great.
And I think there's just something about the original authenticity of a person,
Yes.
right? You see them, that they believe what they believe,
Yeah.
whether you like them or not. It's this sort of genuineness that is so apparent.
Yeah.
And I think, an individual in an office or running for office, you lose some of that.
You do.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have all these stakeholders around you, and it feels like you're not yourself at some point, and that has to be just philosophically so antithetical to an individual's core.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, there's a line everybody has that you don't want to cross. Little by little, you get close to it, and occasionally you cross it, and at some point the line disappears. And I'm not sure I could be comfortable with that. And so people maybe are, and I recognize the need for compromise. Like, that's not the issue. Not dogmatic in the politics of it, because things have to move, and sometimes that requires people to meet halfway. But it's the compromises with yourself that are the most troublesome, and that I'm not sure I could deal with.
Yeah. Outside of the classroom, what are some things that like you just enjoy, that you're passionate about, that you plugged into, that you would not give up it for anything?
Yeah, we read a lot. I mean, I love to read biographies, and so we do a lot of that. We're outside a lot. We go and play tennis. My boys play tennis, and so I'm routinely beaten by them. I've learned to be a gracious loser, hopefully. So those are things that I just really enjoy doing. We also like to we like to go to the art museum. There's all kinds of great stuff in Houston. That's one big benefit of some of the wonderful things we've got in the city. In fact, the Holocaust Museum recently had which sounds sad and depressing, which it sort of is, but they had an exhibit on De La Huerta, and beautiful. The pictures and just that era. I love the history of it. So it was a great combination of kind of art and history for me that I'm really, really enjoying.
One of the things that I think is so wonderful about teaching is that you're in front of a wonderful group of people usually every semester, but there's these times, right, when we're teaching and they just feel like it's this sort of high, it's a heightened sense of a period of time in which all the stars are aligned, and it just comes together beautifully.
I love that.
In doing what you do, all of us doing what we do on a daily basis, what are some of the things that you think are significant to a contemporary student today, these first generational students that we are still in front of today? What are some things that you think are fundamental to ensuring that they can move through just like you and I have?
Yeah. I think one big thing is that you give students tools. And I didn't recognize this until, later in my teaching career. And I taught, as an adjunct in various places, and when I was in graduate school. And then I was at the University of Idaho before I moved to Houston. So I've seen a bunch of different kinds of students. And the thing I think that's most common, the things that really snags them, is the kind of hands-on, practical sort of tools that they can use in the job that they're going to do. That really lights them up in a way. So I like to focus on those kinds of things. I teach a class on campaigns and elections, which has a lot of practical experience. We look at the voter file, we work through polling data,
Nice.
We do mapping. It's nothing that's, the kind of thing that you would do if you're a full-time consultant, but to get you in the door, it is a really helpful tool. And I think students really respond to that. That's been a phenomenally good class. I also like to give students a sense of the history. And I think that people, employers and, kind of professors down the road, if they choose to go to graduate school, are impressed that the students aren't just worried about what's happening now or in their own lives, but they have a bigger sense of where they fit and where the politics of the moment fit. So to me, that's another big factor that gives them the ability to be able to succeed, because they see that there's more than just what's in front of them.
I tell students the person that you see in front of you today in the classroom is the same person that's at the grocery store, is the same person that's at the gym, and so forth. And I try to, as you say, connect, with students in some very different ways. And I know that it's getting harder to, just because of the numerous, number of students that we have in front of us at any given time. What would you say the one thing is that works all the time in terms of the person that you are and how you connect with your own students?
Yeah. The thing that's the best icebreaker is just what's happening on campus. Sometimes it's sports, sometimes it's music. UH has got a really vibrant scene for the arts. And so talking with students about the things that are happening, I think that really snags them. We also, for classes that are political science specific, talking about events that are occurring around that they have a relationship to. Those things are the things I think that are the most. I'll often do like a joke icebreaker, or like something crazy that happened in politics that week, like a crazy tweet, or Mike Bloomberg a few weeks ago tried to shake a dog's mouth with his hand, and it was just a weird thing, but it gets students thinking, and so we bridge from that to say, well, here's sort of why he's doing it. The media matters, where things sit in the Democratic primary. And then all of a sudden we launch into how primaries matter and who's voting and, whether or not the culling process is working. So it's a natural sort of flow that, gets them interested. So it's the joke, it's some humor and something relatable that just seems out of place and that connects to them.
I think so too, right? I mean, we have an agenda, we go in, but sometimes there's this impromptu moments that are more meaningful than the other things.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I often do here, and I know this time period that we have doesn't encapsulate the total human being that you are, the wonderful person that I'm sitting in front of. So thank you for that. But I always end the podcast, and we're coming to the period of time where we'll have to say goodbye, unfortunately. But I often end asking the following question, and let me see how you answer this. And I don't tell people that they're going to be asked this question because I want to catch them a little bit off guard. So there was an intentional motivation here. Is what would Brandon Rottinghaus tell a younger Brandon Rottinghaus about himself? What advice would you give to your younger self right now as you're sitting in front of me today?
That's a great question. I would say trust yourself. That's something I think it took me a long time to get to, where I felt like I, wasn't sure in a lot of cases and maybe hesitated in ways I shouldn't, but trust your instincts. That's something that I'd probably tell my younger self. People make all kinds of choices when they're young. It's education, it's jobs, it's family, and I think the thing that's the most impactful is that you can't get away from who you are, and you have to embrace it. So trust where you are, and at all points, and it'll work out the way it's supposed to if you do that.
No, thank you. First of all, I'd like to really thank, of course, Brandon. I'd like to thank Oxford Publishing for bringing Brandon on campus today. And I hope this isn't the last time that we see you. I hope we're able to see you again. And so thank you on behalf of EPCC Talks to Dr. Brandon Rottinghaus, Oxford Publishing, and we're grateful for your time and always listening to us. Thank you.